Through this garage, inside this house, something unimaginable has just occurred. A massacre. There are 3 victims, 2 of them women, lying sprawled onto the floor in the pool of their own blood, from apparent multiple gunshot wounds to the face. And as heartbreaking as those ladies' demise is, it's the 3rd victim, whose death is heart-wrenching. The 3rd victim is the body of a little boy who'd already been dealt a bad hand in life. Physically and intellectually disabled, he was wheelchair-bound and completely bedridden for almost all his life, with the evil perpetrator having broken into his home and creating this crime. This precious little angel would have never understood anything that was happening to the women around him or himself. But that did not stop the perpetrator from viciously pursuing to end his life, and unfortunately his wouldn't be as quick as the women's. The perpetrator approached the little boy, who was hooked up to a tracheostomy and breathing machine, unhooked his trach from the device, hoping this would immediately stop him from breathing. Problem is, the machine alarm has gone off, signaling for help. Quickly, the perpetrator does something even more sinister. A hand was placed over the little boy's tracheostoma, nose, and mouth. As limited in mobility as he was, he fought to breathe, he fought for his life, but it was still taken. Now the perpetrator is currently ransacking the house, looking for money and credit cards, but this person is also in a state of sheer panic. The little boy's breathing machine alarm is still going off and is ringing loudly throughout the house. The assailant can't finish rummaging due to fear of the alarm alerting the neighbors. But they've already done enough. They've taken 3 precious lives. But the question is why? Better yet, who? Listen up, because the answer might surprise you. This is a trigger warning. The story I'm about to tell you is a very sensitive topic. The descriptions of this case, the victims involved, as well as the crimes are very vivid in detail and may be disturbing to some. Viewer discretion is highly advised. If you're a fan of Motown, have you ever wondered why you feel so good when you hear the music? Have you ever asked yourself why those melodies, those harmonies feel like pure magic? Why the music makes you smile before the lyrics even start? Well, what if I told you that behind those feelings is not just the voices of the artist or the genius of Berry Gordy, but the work of a man you've probably never heard of, Lawrence Horn. His talent, his innovation, his vision in the recording studio are what made the Motown sound what it is. Timeless and unforgettable, and he's ultimately part of the reason you feel the way you do when you listen to Motown. In the golden era of Motown, the music world was captivated by the smooth sounds of Marvin Gaye, the Supremes, and the Temptations. Behind these iconic records was Lawrence Horn, a gifted sound engineer who brought some of Motown's biggest hits to life. He contributed to timeless hits like Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, My Girl by the Temptations, Stop in the Name of Love by the Supremes, and countless other hits that we still jam to this day. But beneath Lawrence's quiet brilliance lurked a darkness no one could have imagined. As smart and meticulous as this man was, unfortunately, he would use his genius to harm people in ways that those around him wouldn't have expected. And because of how calculated he was, he almost always got away with it. Lawrence Thomas Horn was born April 18, 1939 in Detroit, Michigan. Even as a small child, Lawrence, LT for short, had a fascination with electronics. He was the type of child that would take toys or a radio, dismantle them to see how it worked, and then put it back together, sometimes better than it was before. In high school, he showed his love and brilliance in science and math, with his teacher encouraging him to pursue a career in engineering. His love for gadgets, electronics, and systems led him to embark on a multifaceted career that began with his service in the U.S. Navy. During his tenure, he served aboard the USS Lake Champlain, where he gained experience working as a DJ on the ship's radio station. This role allowed him to hone his technical skills and foster a deep appreciation for music and sound engineering. Also, while he was there, Lawrence showed how he could use his intelligence to cause harm. He would get discharged from the Navy due to a very evil act he committed on a fellow worker, but we'll find out what he'd actually done later. After his discharge from the Navy, Horn returned to his hometown of Detroit. There he worked as a sound engineer for local bands in the city, as well as worked in radio, where he honed his skills as a sound technician. His work in broadcast radio gave him a foundation in the precise manipulation of sound, a skill that would later set him apart from many other technicians at the time. He was building a major reputation for how unique his work was. He was making a name for himself locally, and because of this, he'd cross paths with a man who was about to make music history, Berry Gordy. In 1963, at the age of 22, Lawrence Horn joined Motown Records, then a burgeoning family-run enterprise. Horn's introduction to Berry Gordy and Motown came through a mix of talent and timing. A mutual connection recommended Horn to Gordy, who was on the lookout for skilled technicians to support his up-and-coming label. At the time, Motown was still finding its footing, operating out of the modest Hitsville, USA, house on West Grand Boulevard in Detroit. Horn, with his technical expertise and ambition, was the perfect fit. He was paid $50 a week as a technician, and his technical skill and innovative approach to sound engineering quickly elevated him to the position of Motown's first full-time engineer. While many sound engineers of the era focused solely on recording, Horn approached his work with a creative mindset, treating the mixing console as an instrument in its own right. One of Horn's key innovations was his ability to layer instruments in a way that gave Motown songs their rich, textured quality. He often experimented with overdubbing and double-tracking vocals, techniques that enhanced the depth of the recordings. This was particularly evident in tracks like My Girl by The Temptations, where the lush orchestration and vocal harmonies created an unforgettable listening experience. He was also very stern about the equipment. Even though he didn't own any of the equipment in the studio, he'd cuss the other operators or artists clean out if anyone even slightly touched a knob or dial. He was almost OCD-ish about it. And not only was he great at manipulating the sounds and audio that we love so much, he actually built the studio equipment. It was said that Lawrence was smart and skilled enough that he could have been a Sony manufacturer himself. Horn's contributions extended beyond engineering. He co-produced hits like Junior Walker and the All-Stars Shotgun, and co-wrote tracks including Shake and Finger Pop and Shoot Your Shot. Lawrence always described himself as LT, your man with a plan. And it seemed he was really good at making plans, as we'll see later on, and all of his technical work for Hitsville began to pay off greatly. Due to his major role at Motown, Lawrence was able to live the high life. He worked hard, but partied just as hard. He was living a Hollywood dream in the Motor City. In the late 1960s, Motown began to transition from a family-run business to a major player in television and film production, and expanded its operations and relocated to Los Angeles. Lawrence moved with the company, and it's there where the beginning cracks to the end of his greatness started. For Horn, the move to Los Angeles came with its challenges. While he continued to work for Motown, the company's focus began to change, and so did his role. He wasn't as needed or revered as he was back in Detroit. The music scene was changing and evolving, and Motown was focusing more on movies, so Lawrence's role wasn't as appreciated as before. But this didn't stop him from living his wild, extravagant lifestyle. Here, Lawrence partied just as hard as before and mingled with the high rollers of the industry. He spent so much money on lavish items, including jewelry and cars, and one of them almost took him out. In 1972, Lawrence Horn's life took a sudden and violent turn. One day, while speeding through the streets of Detroit in his Porsche, he lost control on an icy highway, flipped several times, and crashed into a ditch. This was an accident so severe that he should have been either killed or critically injured. But in what seemed like an impossible stroke of luck, he walked away without a scratch. For most, surviving such a crash would have been a wake-up call, a moment of reflection, and in many ways, it was for Lawrence Horn. In the days that followed, he began reassessing his life, the fast cars, the music industry, the Hollywood lifestyle. He was successful, but was he truly fulfilled? Then, fate intervened once again. Not long after the accident, Horn found himself in the plush comfort of a first-class seat on an American Airlines flight. As he sipped his drink, his eyes landed on a striking young 21-year-old flight attendant making her way down the aisle. Her name was Mildred Millie Murray. Beautiful, poised, and effortlessly charming, Millie had a warmth about her that instantly drew people in. For Horn, it was an instant attraction. A man used to getting what he wanted, he made his move, engaging her in conversation, flashing his signature Motown confidence. And while Millie was flattered, she was not easily swayed. She had spent years around powerful men, and Horn, for all his charm, was no exception. But he was persistent. And soon what began as a chance meeting at 30,000 feet turned into something more. Their relationship was a whirlwind. Lawrence, being a key player at Motown, introduced Millie to a world of glitz and glamour, A-list parties, recording sessions with music legends, and lavish nights out in Hollywood. For a time, they seemed like the perfect match, his success and her elegance making them a striking couple. But beneath the surface, cracks were already forming. Millie, though captivated by the excitement of Horn's world, was grounded. She valued family, stability, and love. 1. Of 14 siblings, Millie grew up in South Carolina in a close-knit family where chasing dreams was encouraged. She was a woman full of life. Bright, bubbly, and effortlessly charming, Millie had set her sights on becoming a flight attendant from a young age. After excelling in a grueling stewardess training program, she joined American Airlines, where her warmth and optimism quickly earned her a promotion to senior flight attendant, and her family supported her in all her endeavors. She couldn't imagine being so isolated from her family or having a family in general. It was the warm family life that she was accustomed to. Lawrence, on the other hand, thrived on the energy of the music business, the late nights, the high-profile connections, and the ever-present temptations of fame. It was this kind of behavior that had ruined his first short-lived marriage. Back in 1965, Lawrence married Motown secretary Juana Royster, but after only 8 months, the two divorced. But what had once been thrilling for Lawrence and Millie as a new couple soon became volatile. Arguments erupted, followed by passionate reconciliations, and their toxic cycle repeated. In spite of the chaos, in 1973, they married in Las Vegas, and a year later, in 1974, they welcomed their daughter, Tiffany. For a brief moment, it seemed as though fatherhood might change Lawrence, that family life might finally become his priority. However, the arrival of their child only highlighted the cracks in their marriage. Lawrence prioritized his work at Motown and his fast-paced lifestyle over his parental responsibilities, leaving Millie to shoulder the demands of raising their child alone. The industry, the parties, and the music always came first. Despite Lawrence's neglect, Millie adored their life together, at least on the surface. She loved the lavish lifestyle he provided, but her true priority was family. Over time, the couple's fights became more frequent, and their reconciliations less satisfying. By 1979, after 5 years of a rocky marriage, they separated. What had started with a miraculous escape from death and a fateful meeting in the sky would ultimately unravel into heartbreak, betrayal, and, years later, a crime so shocking that it would forever stain the legacy of the man who once helped shape the sound of Motown. After their separation, Millie moved to Maryland with Tiffany to be closer to her family, a support system she could always rely on. Meanwhile, Lawrence stayed in Los Angeles to remain close to Motown. Tiffany's visits to her father were limited to summer holidays, but they were memorable. Lawrence introduced her to the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, taking her to exclusive parties, and even introducing her to legends like Stevie Wonder. Meanwhile, back in Maryland, Millie worked hard to rebuild her life as a single mother, eventually filing for divorce in 1981. But despite their separation, Millie and Lawrence found it difficult to completely cut ties with each other. They would often cross paths and indulge in secret rendezvous, while co-parenting Tiffany, or during Millie's work trips to Los Angeles. But all that secret lovemaking would rear its ugly head when, in 1984, Millie revealed a shocking development. She was pregnant again, and Lawrence was the father. This news stunned Millie's family, who believed the couple had ended their relationship years earlier. With this unexpected situation, not surprising, it quickly became clear that Lawrence had little interest in supporting Millie during her pregnancy. He hadn't changed one bit and didn't want a family in the same way that Millie did. Once again, her family rallied around her, offering the love and support that Lawrence would not. And to everyone's surprise, Millie wasn't just carrying one child, she was expecting twins. However, her motherly excitement would be interrupted when complications arose, and Millie went into premature labor at just 7 months. Twins Tamiel and Trevor Horn were born prematurely on August 5, 1984. While Tamiel was small, she was healthy, but unfortunately, Trevor faced significant complications from the moment he entered the world. Doctors gave Millie a grim prognosis. Trevor's chances of survival were no better than 50-50. He had underdeveloped lungs and had struggles with breathing. While his sister was able to go home and be with family, he was in the NICU for 3 months. At the time of the twins' birth, Millie's oldest daughter, Tiffany, was visiting her father, Lawrence, in Los Angeles during her summer break. Because things were looking so grim for baby Trevor, Millie's sister Vivian called Lawrence, urging him to bring Tiffany back to Maryland so she could meet her newborn brother in case Trevor didn't survive. However, Lawrence refused, stating that Tiffany was looking forward to attending the Motown picnic that he was taking her to that weekend. True to form, Lawrence prioritized his career and celebrity lifestyle over his family, even as his son's life hung in the balance. Hell, he wasn't even interested in meeting his own son. But against all odds, baby Trevor survived. Although he required constant care and frequent hospitalizations, he became a symbol of resilience, thriving as a premature baby with health issues. However, the challenges Trevor already faced took an even more devastating turn on September 16, 1986. During a routine visit to the Children's Hospital National Medical Center, his tracheostomy tube was accidentally disconnected, and the doctors had a very hard time placing it back in. In an interview that Millie did with WRC-TV, she described the horrible ordeal. She explained what happened to Trevor. She said, "They were trying to get an IV to give Trevor his blood transfusion. His tracheostomy tube came out, and they couldn't get it back in. He went into arrest. He was coded for an hour and 20 minutes, and as a result, Trevor experienced brain damage. They told me Trevor probably would not be any more than a vegetable. I was just totally crushed. It was like darkness in a tunnel. There was not going to be any light. At that point, I almost considered taking Trevor off all life support and just letting nature do its will. But I just couldn't do it. It's been a struggle, but because of Trevor's tremendous will to live, I've had the will to hang in there with him and give him the best support I can, the best life that I can." While Millie stepped into what many called supermom mode, devoting herself to Trevor's care, Lawrence showed little interest in his son's life. In one conversation with his daughter Tiffany, Lawrence cruelly remarked that an intellectually disabled quadriplegic child could never truly be a real son to him. By 1987, Millie and Lawrence's divorce was finalized. Lawrence was ordered to pay $650 per month in child support, but Millie handled the full-time parenting duties. Lawrence returned to Los Angeles to focus on his dwindling career, while Millie continued to fight for her children's futures. In 1988, Millie filed a lawsuit against the hospital for negligence, holding them accountable for Trevor's extensive injuries. The case dragged on for 2 years, during which Millie and Lawrence's relationship grew even more venomous. Lawrence's declining career only exacerbated the tension. As the music industry shifted in the late 1980s, Motown's original sound fell out of favor, giving way to new genres like New Jack Swing, dance, new wave, and rock. The ownership of Motown with Berry Gordy changed hands and was bought out by MCA, and Lawrence found himself pushed out of the company's plans. By 1990, he had lost his final position at Motown, a low-paying job managing the tape library. Living under the assumption that money would always flow, Lawrence had no savings and soon fell behind on his child support payments. In March 1990, the lawsuit was settled, and Trevor was awarded a significant financial settlement. The agreement included an annuity of $4,835 per month for life, adjusted for inflation, and a lump sum payment of $1.1 million to be held in trust until Trevor turned 18, with Millie as the trustee. Millie herself received $322,000 from the settlement. Even though Lawrence was not a part of his son's life in any significant way, during the financial negotiations with the hospital, Lawrence arrogantly scribbled a figure on a piece of paper, demanding a $1 million payout for himself. However, the final settlement awarded him only about $150,000. Furious with what he viewed as an unfair share, Lawrence openly expressed his dissatisfaction. After a heated argument with Millie over the money, Lawrence stormed out of her home, declaring he was done with the entire family. And true to his word, he cut off all contact, not just with Millie, but also with his daughters Tiffany and baby Tamiel. Millie used the entirety of her settlement to purchase a family home in the upscale Orleans Hill neighborhood of Silver Spring, Maryland, just a few doors down from her sister Vivian. It was here where Millie would try to raise her children the best way that she could, as a single mother of 3, especially giving extra attention to Trevor. Due to the horrible accident that caused him so much anguish, Trevor was severely physically and intellectually disabled, requiring round-the-clock care. Born with underdeveloped lungs, he breathed through a tracheostomy tube connected to a portable oxygen tank, which provided oxygen and humidification. His disabilities left him unable to see, hear, or speak clearly, and he was often confined to his bed or wheelchair. Despite these challenges, Trevor was described as a cheerful, happy child who brought joy to everyone around him. He managed to do things that doctors said he'd never be able to do. At school, Trevor was making remarkable progress. He had learned a few words in sign language and delighted in physical education and games with friends. To his teachers and nurses, he was a bright light, defying the odds that doctors had once believed impossible. Millie's devotion to Trevor was boundless. Often called a supermom by those who knew her, she gave everything to ensure Trevor had the best care and a loving environment. They were a familiar sight around their community, with Millie gently pushing Trevor in his wheelchair, driving him in her specially modified Chevrolet Astro minivan. He was even able to enjoy things like other kids could. On Halloween, Millie would dress Trevor as his favorite character, the mischievous and free-spirited Peter Pan. Trevor's family adored him. His relatives affectionately nicknamed him Tricky Trev, and his cheeky laugh was known to fill their homes with joy. He inherited a love of music, reacting with delight when his favorite songs played. Despite his severe disabilities, Trevor managed to vocalize a few words and even created his own special language. For example, he lovingly referred to his twin sister Tamiel as Lala, a term he used to express "I love you." Millie's devotion, along with the love and support of her family, was a testament to the beauty of their bond. To everyone who saw it, the connection between Trevor and his family was nothing short of extraordinary, and Millie was determined to make everything work. At night, Trevor depended on a life support machine to assist his breathing. Constant monitoring of this equipment was crucial. It was the difference between life and death. Meanwhile, while Mildred and the children were thriving with their lives together, Lawrence quickly burned through his share of the settlement, leaving him financially unstable and damn near destitute. By 1992, he had stopped paying child support entirely, amassing a debt of nearly $20,000. Millie, determined to provide for her 3 children, knew she would have to take Lawrence to court to recover the money. Her persistence enraged Lawrence, who had always been prone to violent outbursts. During their heated phone calls, he would scream at Millie, threatening her if she pursued legal action. This was the anger and cruelty that many didn't know was inside of Lawrence, and his calculated ways of harming people was starting to show. This was one of the reasons he was discharged from the Navy early in his career. Millie confided in her family and colleagues about his threats to her, recounting how Lawrence once bragged about shoving a sailor off a ship during his naval service and making it look like an accident. Millie's growing fear of Lawrence led her to take precautions. She installed a burglar alarm in her home and instructed Trevor's nurses never to open the door to strangers while she was away. She even forbade Lawrence from coming to or entering her house. Millie was candid about her concerns and could probably even see the future when she started telling her friends, "If anything ever happens to me, Lawrence will be responsible." In the spring of 1992, after nearly 2 years of silence, Lawrence contacted his eldest daughter, Tiffany. She missed her father and was eager to reconnect with him. It seemed Lawrence had had a change of heart, expressing that he missed her and wanted to be part of his children's lives again. For the first time, Lawrence asked about Trevor, appearing interested in his son's health and care. Tiffany, pleased that her father was finally showing interest in her baby brother, shared details about Trevor's daily routine, his medical needs, and the role of the nurses who cared for him. On June 17, 1992, Lawrence arrived unannounced at Millie's house with a video camera. Millie wasn't home at the time, allowing Lawrence to set up a tripod in her driveway undisturbed. He pointed the camera at the house and asked Tiffany to show him which windows led to whose rooms, claiming he wanted to see Trevor. When Lawrence asked to go inside, Tiffany respected her mother's rules and refused to let him in. However, she didn't want to deny him the chance to see his son, so she agreed to take the camera inside and film Trevor herself. Even though Tiffany felt this was all an odd request, she was glad that her father seemed to be making an effort to reconnect with the family. But what Tiffany didn't know is that she was actually inadvertently helping her father pull off a heinous crime that would ruin all of their lives forever. Okay, so here's the part where I'd like to issue a trigger warning. The crime I'm about to reveal is very descriptive and also involves the harm of a child. If things like this disturbs you, you may want to fast forward or even skip the rest of this video. On the evening of March 2nd, 1993, Millie Horn found herself in a familiar dilemma. She'd gone back to work as a senior flight attendant with American Airlines, and she was preparing for an early departure in the morning. Flight 731 to San Juan, scheduled to leave at 8:07 a.m. from Baltimore Washington International Airport. Her demanding schedule as a single mother, especially to her physically disabled son Trevor, meant finding care for her children, and this was a constant challenge. This wouldn't be an issue for her eldest daughter Tiffany, who was now 18 years old and a freshman living on campus at Howard University. But Millie's 8-year-old twins, Tamiel and Trevor, required more attention. Tamiel would be spending the night at Millie's mother's house tonight, but Trevor's unique needs made it impossible for him to stay elsewhere. Unfortunately, that evening, the nurse scheduled to watch over Trevor fell ill and was unable to take the shift. Millie, who was still preparing for her early flight the following morning, was panicking. She couldn't stay up all night and still perform her duties the next day. Her sister, Vivian, who was always eager to help with Trevor, regrettably declined this time as she had work the following day too. Running out of options, Millie contacted another trusted caregiver, 38-year-old Janice Saunders, one of Trevor's longtime nurses. Janice was at home that night with her husband Michael and their 5-year-old son when Millie called. She understood the pressure Millie was under and had a deep fondness for Trevor, whom she had cared for over the past 5 years. Without hesitation, Janice agreed to step in at the last minute. To help pass the long hours of her shift, Janice brought along her latest needlework project, a cross-stitch pattern titled The Parade. Designed by artist Pete Buckley Moss, the piece depicted a boy pulling a wagon carrying a girl and her kittens. It was the 5th of Moss's works that Janice had stitched, a testament to her love for the artist's creations. She had only completed the boy's hat, and hoped to make significant progress while keeping watch over Trevor while he slept. At 7:15 a.m., Millie's sister Vivian drove the short distance to Millie's home. She'd often check in on Millie and her children before going to work herself. With Millie already gone for work, Vivian expected to find only Trevor and Janice at home. Janice's shift was due to end at 8 a.m., and Vivian wanted to ensure the nurse could leave on time. Grateful she had taken the shift for Millie on short notice. As Vivian pulled up, an unsettling sight greeted her. The garage door was wide open, an unusual occurrence for Millie, who was always cautious. Even more alarming, Millie's minivan was missing. Entering the garage, Vivian immediately felt something was wrong. Sofa cushions were scattered on the floor, and a strange, faint scent lingered in the air. Inside the house, the furious, high-pitched beeping of Trevor's apnea monitor pierced the silence. The sound signaled that Trevor had stopped breathing. Overcome with worry, Vivian ran to a neighbor's house, frantically begging them to go with her inside her sister's house. Together, they returned to Millie's home and unlocked the front door. But the door barely opened, as though something heavy was blocking it. Peering through the narrow gap, Vivian's worst fears came true. A body lay on the floor just inside the door. Her heart sank as she recognized her sister Millie. Her fixed, unblinking eyes stared back at Vivian, and half of her face was missing. What Vivian didn't know was that only a few hours ago her sister, nephew, and his nurse were mercilessly massacred. In the middle of the night, around 2:30 to 3 a.m., a man broke into Millie's home in the back through the French doors. The intruder seemed to know exactly where he was going and who he was going for. Traveling quietly throughout the house, he made his way through the dining room and to the medical nursery for Trevor. He spotted Janice, who was sitting in a chair next to Trevor's crib, and she was knitting her quilt. Startled by the man standing in front of her, the intruder pulled out his gun and shot Janice twice in the face at point-blank range. He made sure to particularly aim for her eye and skull. Her body hit the floor hard with her hands still clutching her knitting needles. Even though he'd shot a gun, the house was just as quiet because this intruder used a silencer. It was clear that this wasn't a burglar, but a cold-hearted killer, not there to steal anything except for lives. He turned his attention to Trevor. And even though Trevor would not have been able to see, hear, or understand what had happened in front of him, this didn't stop the intruder from making him his next target. The intruder pulled Trevor's trach from the machine, thinking that that would kill him instantly, but no. The alarm went off, signaling that it was detached. Soon, alerted that her son's machine was going off, Millie came rushing down the stairs to see what was happening. She was met with the intruder, who had his gun pointed at her. Just as he'd done to Nurse Janice, he shot Millie in the head, causing her to fall downstairs to the foyer. He then stood over top of her and shot her 3 more times at point-blank range and made sure to get her in the eye. He turned his sights back to Trevor, who was still clinging on. The alarm still piercing through the house made the intruder panic. Trevor was taking too long to go, so he plugged his finger through his trach hole and covered his nose and mouth. Though the little boy couldn't move much, Trevor was fighting for his life, something that would show with the bloodshot pinpoints that developed in his eyes from struggling to breathe. Finally, the little one stopped struggling and went limp, looking the way he always did, while sleeping in his crib, surrounded by his stuffed animals. The sound was really getting to the intruder, and he began to rush the job. He started to ransack the house, only slightly turning over a coffee table and opening drawers. He threw a couple of pillows on the floor, but didn't do much. He did steal Millie's credit cards, and he fled the home in Millie's minivan into the darkness of the night. And this was the scene that Vivian had stumbled upon. She called for help. Police arrived at the Horn family home within minutes of the 911 call. Upon entering, they were immediately confronted with the lifeless body of Mildred Horn. She lay just inside the front door, dressed in her nightgown and hair rollers in her hair scattered on the floor. It appeared to the police that she had been shot in the face at close range with a high-powered weapon. Following the sound of the relentless, high-pitched beeping, the alarm of Trevor's apnea monitor, officers moved to the child's room. The room was pristine, arranged much like a hospital ward, except for the blood pooling around the body of Nurse Janice Saunders. Then, the officers approached the crib-like bed, and there lay Trevor's motionless body. Several areas of the Horn home showed signs of disturbance. Drawers had been pulled open, a cocktail table was moved, and cushions were scattered across the floor. A bookcase was overturned, the contents of a closet dumped onto the floor, and Millie's purse was found, spilled out in the bathroom. In the basement, the mesh screen of a window had been pulled away, with pry marks visible on the frame. At first glance, the scene suggested a botched burglary, but as investigators examined further, the details didn't add up. Despite the apparent ransacking, valuables were left untouched. Millie's substantial jewelry collection, including a 5-carat diamond bracelet lying in plain sight, had not been taken. Expensive electronics like televisions and music equipment remained undisturbed. Even Janice Saunders' purse and jewelry were left behind. The only items missing were credit and check cashing cards from Millie's purse. Detectives quickly concluded the scene had been staged to appear as a burglary gone wrong. In reality, this was a calculated and professional murder. The efficiency with which the victims were killed left no doubt. Millie was shot 3 times in the head, Janice twice, and Trevor suffocated, despite having no ability to identify his killer. Forensics scoured the house but found little to work with. No foreign fibers, hairs, fingerprints, or shoe prints were left behind. A fragment of a .22 caliber bullet lodged in a wall was one of the few physical clues. However, the distortion of .22 caliber bullets upon firing made matching it to a weapon difficult. 2 items were left behind by the killer. The first was a small tool with tape wrapped around the handle found near the garage door. It tested positive for gunshot residue. The second was flecks of grass found on Trevor's face, though their significance remained unclear at the time. The time of the murders was able to be pinpointed thanks to the meticulous logs kept by Janice Saunders. She had recorded Trevor's vital signs every hour without fail. When her entries stopped at 2 a.m., police determined the killer had arrived shortly after. Later that day, Millie's minivan was discovered abandoned in the parking lot of a townhouse development in the nearby suburb of Lake Hill, less than a mile from the Horn home. The keys were still in the ignition, and the vehicle was locked. Investigators speculated that the killer parked their own car at a nearby construction site, walked to the Horn house to carry out the murders, and then used Millie's van to return to their vehicle before fleeing. By midday, Millie's missing credit cards were also recovered by police. A jogger had found them scattered along Route 28 in Montgomery County, approximately 20 miles west of the Horn residence. As the investigation unfolded, detectives turned their attention to Millie's eldest daughter, Tiffany, who was attending Howard University. When police informed her of her mother and brother's murders, Tiffany blurted out, "My father had something to do with this, didn't he?" On the day of the murders, Tiffany was brought in from school to talk to the police, and she shared all of this information with them. She explained how previously her father had asked detailed questions about Trevor's care and had shown an unusual interest in the layout of Millie's house. Tiffany also revealed a chilling phone call she had received from her dad just days before the killings. Lawrence had bombarded her with questions about where she and her sister Tamiel would be staying over the next few days. Even more troubling was Lawrence's behavior the night before the murders. He had contacted his former sister-in-law Vivian, asking where his daughters were staying that evening. Due to her filming the layout of the house, Tiffany felt tremendous guilt when she realized that she had possibly inadvertently helped her dad commit this horrendous crime. But her testimony to the police helped them to possibly get closer to their person of interest. Police tracked Lawrence to his mother's house in Los Angeles to question him about the murders. One thing that they noticed immediately was Lawrence's peculiar reaction. Instead of expressing shock or grief from what he heard, Lawrence's first response was to ask if he was a suspect. When investigators pressed him further, Lawrence produced a videotape. The footage showed him at home with his girlfriend on the couch, then out of nowhere, showed Lawrence standing in his living room in front of a television, with the local news playing in the background. The time and date were clearly displayed. 11:45 p.m. Los Angeles time, which was 2:45 a.m. in Maryland, the exact time of the murders. While the tape seemed to prove Lawrence could not have been physically present at the crime scene, it raised more questions than it answered. The footage struck investigators as suspiciously convenient. Why would Lawrence, a man in financial ruin, suddenly decide to videotape a quiet night at home while his ex-wife, son, and nurse were being killed on the other side of the country? Dubbed the alibi tape by investigators, the recording only deepened their suspicions of him. Over the following week, detectives interviewed Millie's family and friends, uncovering numerous accounts of her tumultuous marriage to Lawrence and her growing fear of him. Vivian was blunt in her assessment, telling investigators she was certain Lawrence was responsible for the murders. Other family members echoed her concerns, pointing to his history of violence and financial desperation. Sniffer dogs were brought to the crime scene and the surrounding areas, including Route 28, where Millie's credit cards had been discarded. During the search, they uncovered a crucial piece of evidence: a metal trigger mechanism from an AR-7, a semi-automatic rifle that fires .22 caliber bullets, the same type used in the murders. The weapon had been intentionally disassembled and its serial number carefully drilled out, making it untraceable. Expert analysis determined the trigger mechanism had been exposed to the elements for only a few weeks, suggesting it had been discarded shortly before the murders. This piece of evidence, though fragmented, pointed to the calculated nature of the crime. Investigators were convinced they had uncovered a critical piece of the murder weapon. 9 days after the killings, police executed a search warrant at Lawrence Horn's Los Angeles apartment. It was a stark contrast to the luxurious life he once lived, a cramped, cheap apartment reflecting the financial decline of the former Motown sound engineer. Inside, police confiscated a trove of potential evidence: 3 computers, disks, hard drives, backup drives, telephone and bank records, videotapes, cassette tapes, microcassette tapes, a telephone answering machine, and several files of documents. 4 detectives were assigned full-time to comb through the overwhelming volume of materials, and among the thousands of items they found key clues. One document was a hand-drawn map of Northgate Drive, marked with an X where Millie's house was located. Another piece of paper listed Millie's flight number and departure time on the morning she was killed. There was also a homemade video showing Lawrence driving from Washington, D.C. to Millie's house. In the footage, he zoomed in on each window, narrating what rooms were behind them. The most chilling discovery, however, was a 22-second recording from Lawrence's answering machine. On the tape, an unidentified male spoke rapidly, his words cryptic. "I couldn't finish because of the noise. You understand what I'm saying?"
I gave a talk?
No.
Okay. All right, so I'm sitting there.
Can you,
I can take a picture of him, right face there, but I couldn't, the noise, you understand what I'm saying? I wasn't able to do that, and I didn't want to go frontwise.
Detectives subpoenaed telephone records for all calls made to and from Lawrence Horn's apartment during the week surrounding the murders. From the extensive call logs, they identified 4 long-distance calls of interest, 2 made from Detroit, where Lawrence had once been deeply connected to the music scene, and 2 from Maryland. All 4 calls originated from payphones, suggesting an effort to conceal the caller's identity. One call made at 5:12 a.m. on March 3, 1993, the morning of the murders, came from a payphone outside a Denny's restaurant in Gaithersburg, Maryland. This location was roughly 10 miles, or a 10-minute drive, from Millie's house. Investigators suspected this was the same call captured on Lawrence's answering machine, featuring the mysterious cryptic message. As police delved deeper, a pattern emerged. Millie's discarded credit cards and the AR-7 rifle trigger mechanism seemed to have been deliberately dropped along the road leading to one of the payphones used to contact Lawrence. These items appeared like breadcrumbs, hinting at a connection between the crime scene and the caller. Police expanded their search to local motels near the payphone in Gaithersburg. Just 5 miles west of Millie's house, they discovered a nondescript highway motel, the Days Inn on Shady Grove Road in Rockville, Maryland. When detectives interviewed the motel's manager, they learned that a guest from Detroit had checked in shortly after midnight on the night of the murders. The guest paid in cash and checked out by 6:30 a.m., just hours after the killings. While cash payments typically wouldn't require identification, the motel had a policy requiring all guests to show ID, regardless of payment method. The receptionist remembered seeing the man's Michigan driver's license, which listed an address in Detroit. The name printed on the ID was James Perry. James Edward Perry was a man of many personas. Depending on who you asked, he was a minister, a businessman, or a hustler. His business card was as eclectic as his reputation, featuring a moon and star emblem alongside the design of a walking cane. It read, "The House of Wisdom." Dr. J. Perry, cold reader, case buster, spiritual advisor. By appointment only, self-styled as Doctor. Perry, he viewed himself as a learned man, with shelves stacked full of how-to books on nearly every subject. To his clients, Perry was a fixer, someone who could solve problems for the right price. But most of those problems fell squarely on the wrong side of the law. Legitimate employment was out of reach for Perry, a career criminal with a history of armed robberies. His second stint in prison stemmed from a botched bank heist in which he shot a Michigan state trooper, though not fatally. The crime earned him a 10-year prison sentence in the 1970s. Upon his release, Perry reinvented himself as a minister. As a street preacher, he referred to himself as Apostle James, and even claimed to have psychic abilities. Standing barely over 5 feet tall, Perry was a polarizing figure. Behind his back, others mockingly called him the Midget Minister, but few dared say it to his face. From his makeshift headquarters, a seedy Detroit dive bar called Francis, and a shady storefront named Mr. Money, Perry operated in the shadows. Why this 44-year-old Detroit-based career criminal made a 6-hour visit to Maryland on the night of March 2nd to the 3rd, 1993, was a chilling mystery waiting to be unraveled. 5 weeks after the murders, Lawrence Horn participated in an interview with a local newspaper. Appearing as the grieving father, he adamantly denied any involvement in the killings. When questioned about the strange videotapes he had taken of Millie's house and Trevor, Lawrence confidently brushed them off as innocent keepsakes. He claimed he had recorded the footage to show his mother in California because she missed seeing her grandchildren, a claim his mother corroborated. Lawrence insisted he had no financial motive for his son's death, stating that he believed Trevor's medical bills had already drained the trust fund. He even claimed to be so disinterested in the money that he wasn't sure if he still had a copy of the 1990 court settlement. But investigators weren't convinced. Among Lawrence's personal belongings, they found handwritten notes and legal documents related to Trevor's trust fund and annuity. These records revealed that Lawrence was well versed in the settlement's terms. In the event of Trevor's death, the trust, now valued at $1.7 million, would be distributed tax-free to both Lawrence and Millie Horn. However, with Millie gone, Lawrence would become the sole heir to the entire sum. This revelation brought a horrifying realization to investigators. 8-year-old Trevor was likely the primary target. When reporters asked Lawrence how he felt about being treated as a suspect, he replied, "I guess they have to do their job. I just want it to be over with because it's been a nightmare." Months of painstaking investigation dragged on as police methodically sifted through mountains of evidence, determined to make an arrest. This was long before the era of advanced digital forensics. Every piece of information had to be manually and thoroughly examined. Investigators meticulously combed through Lawrence Horn's phone records, contacting telephone companies to identify the owners of each number and trace the origin of every call. Working backward from the day of the murders, they reviewed thousands of phone calls over several months, most of which led to dead ends, but eventually they stumbled upon a crucial piece of evidence: a series of incoming calls to Lawrence's Los Angeles apartment, made from several payphones in Detroit. The calls had been made using a calling card registered under the name Camila McKinney. Calling cards, often used for long-distance or international calls, store a fixed amount of credit. Unlike traditional phone service, these cards don't require a physical presence. They only need the associated PIN. Once the credit runs out, the card can be discarded, making it a difficult trail to follow. When police searched for the card's owner, Camila McKinney, they instead found a woman named Marcia Webb. Marcia admitted to falsifying her identity to obtain telephone service after Pacific Bell had cut her account off due to unpaid bills. Under the alias Camila McKinney, she purchased the calling card. When questioned, Marcia revealed that her cousin, Lawrence Horn, had asked her to set up the account. He claimed he needed the card while traveling, preferring not to have the bills sent to his home address. Marcia complied, and the bills were sent to her, with Lawrence reimbursing her for the charges. Police discovered that the calling card had been used to make 66 calls from Los Angeles payphones to James Perry's residence in Detroit, starting nearly a year before the murders. Notably, many of these payphones were within walking distance of Lawrence Horn's apartment. Additionally, the same card was used to make 70 calls from Detroit payphones, near Perry's known hangouts, back to Lawrence's Los Angeles home. With this compelling link between the two men, authorities placed a discreet wiretap on Lawrence's home phone. However, Lawrence, ever cautious and aware that he was under suspicion, avoided saying anything incriminating over the phone. Detectives also stationed surveillance teams at payphones in both Detroit and Los Angeles, where calls between the two men were known to have occurred. But neither Lawrence nor James Perry was spotted using the phones until July 20th, 1993. On that day, the calling card was used again. This time, the call originated from a payphone at the Calverton Shopping Center in Beltsville, Maryland, and was placed at Francis Bar in Detroit, a known haunt of James Perry. Unbeknownst to Lawrence Horn, police were watching. They photographed him using the payphone at the exact time the call was made, confirming his connection to the mysterious activity. Detectives were now confident that Lawrence and James Perry were in contact and suspected that their conversations revolved around the murders. Meanwhile, Lawrence was still navigating bureaucratic hurdles to claim the payout from Trevor's $1.7 million trust. The process had been delayed by Millie's sister, Vivian, who filed a civil suit to block Lawrence from accessing the funds. Invoking Maryland's Slayer rule, Vivian argued that Lawrence should not be entitled to the proceeds of Trevor's estate because she was certain he was responsible for the deaths of Millie and Trevor. While Lawrence worked to overturn her legal challenge, detectives intensified their surveillance of James Perry, believing him to be the hitman. During their surveillance of Perry, detectives identified several individuals he spent significant time with. Among them was a man named Thomas Turner, who would become a critical figure in tying the threads of the investigation together. Thomas Turner, a trucker by trade and part-time taxi driver, was more than just a casual acquaintance of James Perry. The two had forged a bond in prison more than 13 years earlier, both hailing from Detroit. After their release, they stayed in close contact. Turner even helped Perry promote his House of Wisdom business, handing out flyers to passengers in his cab. Stacks of these flyers, emblazoned with Perry's bold claims of spiritual guidance, were kept in Turner's home, ready for distribution to anyone in need of Perry's questionable services. But Turner's significance to the investigation went far beyond his friendship with Perry. Turner was one of Lawrence Horn's cousins, a crucial link investigators had been desperately seeking. This familial connection finally tied Perry to Horn, providing a much-needed breakthrough in the case. Armed with this new lead, authorities visited James Perry at his Detroit home. Perry answered their questions at the doorstep, exuding a calm demeanor. He admitted to being in Maryland on the night of March 3rd, but claimed it was strictly for business. He insisted he had never heard of Mildred, Trevor, or Lawrence Horn, and denied any knowledge of the murders. Detectives didn't expect Perry to confess, but hoped their visit would unsettle him enough to push him into contacting Lawrence Horn. Despite their suspicions, there was no direct communication between the two men. Instead, investigators believe Perry and Horn were communicating through a trusted middleman, Thomas Turner. With this theory in mind, authorities obtained permission to wiretap Turner's phone. The recordings revealed frequent calls between Turner, Perry, and Lawrence Horn. While the calls suggested a connection, the three men were careful with their words, using vague language and avoiding anything incriminating. Detectives were convinced that Turner was acting as a conduit, relaying coded messages between Perry and Horn. Unfortunately, without concrete proof, their suspicions remained just that. By late 1993, authorities learned that Perry was planning to move out of his Detroit apartment. Fearing that the relocation might destroy critical evidence, they quickly secured a warrant to search the property. Given Perry's violent history, including his shooting and injuring that Michigan State trooper, police approached the operation with caution. A heavily armed SWAT team was dispatched to conduct the raid. The raid, however, turned out to be anticlimactic. Perry was found in bed, offering no resistance. Investigators searched the apartment thoroughly, but uncovered little of immediate significance. Still, certain items raised eyebrows. Despite Perry's self-proclaimed status as a minister, his apartment was filled with voodoo relics and back issues of Soldier of Fortune, a magazine popular among mercenaries and conspiracy theorists. Investigators also found numerous how-to books on criminal topics, including How to Commit the Perfect Crime, Managing Gunshot Wounds, and Crime Scene Investigation. These books, many of which came from the controversial publisher Paladin Press, were cause for concern. Paladin Press was infamous for its catalog of niche, often provocative material, ranging from anarchism and weapons guides to espionage and body disposal. Among its readers was the infamous Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber, who owned their manual called Homemade C4. Investigators seized several items from Perry's apartment, including video cassettes, bank statements, and stacks of Paladin Press books. While sifting through the materials, detectives uncovered a troubling connection. Perry had purchased 2 books from Paladin Press in January 1992, How to Make Disposable Silencers, and Hitman, a technical manual for independent contractors. Intrigued by the manual's contents, detectives ordered copies for themselves. The chilling detail and precision of these guides confirmed their fears. Hitman served as a literal step-by-step instruction manual for carrying out murder, from constructing a silencer to staging a crime scene. It was now clear to investigators that Perry hadn't just stumbled into Maryland on business. He had come with a calculated, lethal purpose. The Hitman Manual, written by Rex Farrell, a self-proclaimed expert in the murder-for-hire trade, was a disturbing 130-page guide that laid out the mechanics of professional assassination. With chilling detail, it provided step-by-step instructions covering every phase of a contract killing, from preparation to execution. The manual advised using stolen out-of-state license plates on rental cars, selecting motels near the crime scene, and even recommended the lightweight and easily concealable AR-7 rifle as the weapon of choice. Rex Farrell instructed readers to drill out the rifle's serial number to render it untraceable. The manual also contained explicit directions, complete with photographs, on constructing a silencer from materials available at any hardware store. It advised hitmen to shoot their victims 3 times, aiming for the eye sockets to ensure a fatal outcome and low blood splatter, and to file down the inside of the gun barrel at the scene to alter ballistic markings. The book even suggested staging the crime scene to resemble a burglary, advising assassins to steal small valuables and discard them, along with weapon parts, at multiple locations to mislead investigators. When detectives compared the details in the Hitman Manual to the evidence from the Maryland triple homicide, the parallels were undeniable. It became clear that James Perry had used the manual as a blueprint, meticulously following 22 steps of its instructions to plan and execute the murders of Mildred Horn, her son Trevor, and nurse Janice Saunders. But Perry made a critical misstep. The manual emphasized the importance of paying with cash and using a fake name when booking accommodations near the crime scene. Perry, however, failed to anticipate that the receptionist at the Days Inn motel would insist on seeing his ID. When faced with the unexpected request, Perry foolishly used his own driver's license, linking him directly to the Maryland motel on the night of the murders. As the investigation zeroed in on Perry, detectives expanded their focus to his associates. In January 1994, Thomas Turner, Perry's close friend and Lawrence Horn's cousin, was brought in for questioning. Under mounting pressure and the threat of legal action, Turner agreed to cooperate in exchange for full immunity. Turner recounted an encounter from the spring of 1992 when Lawrence Horn unexpectedly appeared at his door. It had been nearly a decade since they last spoke, but Lawrence confided in Turner, venting his frustrations about Millie. He described how she had denied him visitation with his children and withheld money he believed he was entitled to. Eager to help and to promote his best friend's business, Turner handed Lawrence one of Perry's flyers for the House of Wisdom. He suggested Lawrence contact Perry, though he claimed he didn't ask what kind of help Perry offered. However, months later, following the murders of Millie and Trevor Horn, Turner began to grow suspicious. His unease deepened as Perry and Horn, wary of wiretaps, enlisted Turner to act as a middleman. He relayed messages and coordinated meetings between the two men, all while feeling increasingly trapped. Turner later told investigators, "I got to thinking I was brought into something, and I didn't know exactly what. I had my suspicions." By 1994, Lawrence Horn, desperate to claim the $1.7 million from Trevor's trust, filed a civil suit against Millie's sisters, who were actively working to block his inheritance. Citing Maryland's Slayer rule, the sisters argued that Lawrence should not profit from Trevor's estate because he was responsible for the murders. The case dragged on, but depositions were eventually scheduled for July 6th and 7th, 1994. Unlike criminal trials, civil cases require a lower burden of proof. The plaintiff must demonstrate their claims by a preponderance of the evidence, and a refusal to answer questions can be interpreted unfavorably by the court. For Lawrence, avoiding the courtroom entirely would have been in his best interest, but blinded by greed, he failed to recognize the risk. What he didn't realize was that the FBI, working with investigators, had spent 15 months building a detailed case against him. The questions in his deposition were strategically crafted based on the mountain of evidence they had gathered. These questions weren't just about Trevor's trust. They were designed to implicate Lawrence in the murders of his ex-wife, son, and their nurse. But if Lawrence wanted any chance of receiving the trust payout, he would have to answer every question under oath. His greed had backed him into a corner, and investigators were ready to capitalize on it. During the deposition, Lawrence Horn admitted to owning Marcia Webb's long-distance calling card, but claimed he hadn't used it since January 1993. He insisted that no one else had access to the card and denied speaking with James Perry or having any contact with him on March 2nd or 3rd, 1993. However, the evidence detectives had gathered told a very different story. Detectives weren't expecting Lawrence to confess. Instead, their goal was to get his statements on record in a court of law. This would allow prosecutors to reference his testimony in a future criminal case, especially since they anticipated he would invoke his right to remain silent during a trial. Following Lawrence's deposition in the civil suit, investigators uncovered proof that he had lied under oath. With this critical development, they were finally ready to move forward. A Montgomery County grand jury indicted Lawrence Horn and James Perry on charges of murder and conspiracy in connection with the brutal killings of Mildred Horn, Trevor Horn, and Janice Saunders. On July 19, 1994, after 16 months of relentless investigation, Lawrence Horn was arrested at his Los Angeles apartment. Just hours later, James Perry walked into a Detroit police station to file a complaint against 2 FBI agents who had been trailing him for days. Agitated, Perry demanded to know whether they intended to arrest him or continue harassing him. Ironically, as he spoke, police received confirmation of his arrest warrant. He was promptly taken into custody and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. James Perry stood trial first, beginning in mid-1995. Prosecutors presented an extensive paper trail that painted a damning picture. They showed evidence of phone calls, Western Union payments, and meetings that Lawrence Horn had arranged to hire Perry as a hitman. They revealed that Perry had purchased the Hitman, a technical manual for independent contractors, and followed its instructions step by step in carrying out the murders. Jurors listened to a haunting recording from Lawrence's answering machine in which Perry cryptically mentioned not being able to finish because of the noise, believed to reference the beeping alarm of Trevor's respirator. Testimony from Lawrence's cousin, Thomas Turner, and recorded phone conversations further strengthened the prosecution's case. On October 12, 1995, after just 5 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict. Perry was found guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. Judge D. Warren Donahue handed down 3 death sentences, along with an additional life sentence for conspiracy to commit murder. In April 1996, it was Lawrence Horn's turn to face justice for masterminding the murders. The prosecution built an overwhelming case against him, using his own testimony from the civil trial to highlight the lies he told under oath. Hundreds of pieces of evidence tied Lawrence to James Perry, including records of their communication and Western Union transfers. Thomas Turner testified that he had introduced Lawrence to Perry and later served as a middleman for their covert exchanges. The jury also watched the videos Lawrence had recorded, showing him driving to Millie's house and filming the exterior, zooming in on windows and identifying the rooms inside. One of the most powerful moments of the trial came when Lawrence's daughter, Tiffany Horn, testified against him. Tearfully, she explained how her father had manipulated her into unknowingly aiding his deadly scheme. She believed he simply wanted to see her brother Trevor, and had no idea that the footage she filmed of the house and her brother would be given to a hitman. Tiffany's testimony underscored the profound betrayal at the heart of the case. The prosecution also introduced Lawrence's alibi tape into evidence. While it showed him at home in Los Angeles at the time of the murders, it only added to the horror of the case. At the very moment he recorded himself watching television, 3,000 miles away, his son Trevor was being suffocated so Lawrence could collect his financial windfall. After 7.5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Lawrence Horn guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. 2 weeks later, at Lawrence's sentencing hearing, the families of Mildred, Trevor, and Janice were present to witness justice being served. The court handed down a life sentence without the possibility of parole for Lawrence's role in orchestrating the murders. For the family members left behind, it was a small measure of closure in the face of such a devastating loss. Michael Saunders, the husband of Janice Saunders, stood before the court and spoke of the enduring pain caused by his wife's murder. He shared how he was haunted by the memory of the joyful sparkle in her eyes, now extinguished forever. Millie's siblings, overcome with grief, expressed the devastating loss of their beloved sister and young nephew Trevor, whose life had been cruelly cut short. Despite the gravity of his crimes, Lawrence Horn narrowly escaped the death penalty. Instead, he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Standing before her father in court, Tiffany Horn delivered a powerful and heart-wrenching statement. "I hate you so much. You've killed my family." Lawrence showed no reaction as he was led out of the courtroom. Although both Lawrence Horn and James Perry were behind bars, the families of the victims believed another entity bore responsibility for the murders. In an unprecedented move, they filed a lawsuit against Paladin Press, the publisher of Hitman, a technical manual for independent contractors. The book had served as a chilling instructional guide for James Perry, detailing how to commit murder for hire. Marketed as a step-by-step guide on how to get in, do the job, and get out without getting caught, they believed this author and publisher was just as responsible. During the investigation, authorities found that Perry had followed at least 22 of the manual's instructions with precision when planning and executing the murders. From constructing a silencer to staging the crime scene as a burglary, the Hitman manual was instrumental in shaping Perry's methods. Initially, the case was dismissed by a federal judge who ruled that the book was protected under the First Amendment's guarantee of free speech. However, Paladin Press had long marketed itself as a publisher that pushed boundaries. Its promotional materials even acknowledged that some of its content might challenge die-hard advocates of free speech. In November 1997, the U.S. Court of Appeals reversed the dismissal, allowing the lawsuit to proceed. This marked a turning point in the legal battle, as the court's decision raised critical questions about the limits of free speech and the ethical responsibilities of publishers. Paladin's president and founder, Petal Und, expressed sympathy for the victims' families, but vehemently denied any moral or ethical responsibility for the murders. He stated, "I am not responsible for the misuse of information of any type. Any information obtained from Paladin had nothing to do with Perry's predisposition to violence." He accused the families of exploiting the tragedy for financial gain and framed the lawsuit as an attack on the Bill of Rights. Unda's legal team argued that holding Paladin liable would set a dangerous precedent for freedom of speech and the press. They noted that, in over a decade of publishing, Paladin had sold approximately 13,000 copies of Hitman, and only one individual, James Perry, had used the book to commit murder. Despite this defense, Paladin Press admitted in court filings that by publishing, distributing, and selling Hitman to Perry, they had directly aided him in carrying out the murders of Mildred Horn, Trevor Horn, and Janice Saunders. However, they maintained that this admission did not make them legally accountable for Perry's actions. In a landmark decision that stunned the legal community, the Supreme Court ruled that a jury could reasonably conclude Paladin Press had aided and abetted the murders by providing step-by-step instructions for murder so comprehensive and detailed as if the instructor were literally present with the would-be murderer. As the trial was scheduled to begin on May 25, 1999, journalists raced to uncover the true identity of the elusive Rex Farrell, the author of the Hitman Manual. In the book's introduction, Rex Farrell had written chillingly, "It is my opinion that the professional hitman fills a need in society and is at times the only alternative for personal justice. Moreover, if my advice and the proven methods in this book are followed, certainly no one will ever know." Speculation swirled that Farrell might have personal ties to the murders, and it was expected that the author would be subpoenaed to testify when the trial commenced. However, just days before the trial, on May 21, 1999, Paladin's insurance company determined the case was too risky to litigate. They chose to settle, agreeing to pay several $1,000,000 to the families of Mildred Horn and Janice Saunders. As part of the settlement, Paladin Press ceased publication of Hitman and agreed to destroy the remaining 700 copies. The publisher, however, claimed these copies had already sold out before they could be removed from shelves. In 2001, James Perry's death sentence was commuted to 3 life sentences. He remained behind bars until December 2009, when he died at the age of 61 from illness. Janice Saunders' mother, then 84 years old, expressed relief upon hearing the news. She told a reporter, "I was hoping somebody killed him. I was hoping it was something awful and lingering." To honor Janice's memory, her husband, Michael Saunders, established a nursing scholarship in her name. He made an initial donation of $2,500 toward a $50,000 goal to provide tuition, books, and fees for a nursing student at Montgomery College, where Janice had graduated in 1983. Local businesses contributed generously, but the largest donation came from Janice's favorite artist, P. Buckley Moss. Moss created a special print titled Stitching Nurse, depicting a Civil War-era nurse working on needlework, echoing the cross-stitch project Janice had been crafting on the night she died. The artwork featured a bleak, wintry landscape outside, symbolizing the season of Janice's tragic death. Reflecting on the community support, Michael said, "It's actually given my son and me a ray of hope to see so much good is out there in the world." In February 2017, Lawrence Horn succumbed to cancer while serving his life sentence in prison. On his deathbed, his daughter Tiffany visited him, hoping for an apology or a shred of remorse. To her devastation, Lawrence offered neither, refusing to take responsibility for his actions. Later that year, on June 3, 2017, Paladin Press founder and president Petal Un passed away suddenly, prompting the closure of the controversial publisher after 47 years in business. Paladin's promotional materials had once described Rex Feral as a fictional character with chilling confidence. Rex Feral kills for hire. Some consider him a criminal, others think him a hero. In truth, he is a lethal weapon aimed at those he hunts. He's a last resource in these times when laws are so twisted that justice goes unserved. He's a man who controls his destiny through his private code of ethics, who feels no twinge of guilt at doing his job. He's a professional killer. But as cold as this Rex Feral was, he wasn't what you expect him to be. In a surprising twist, the Washington Post revealed that Rex Feral was not a hardened professional killer at all, but rather a divorced mother of two from Florida. Originally written as a novel, Hitman had been reworked into a how-to guide at the insistence of Paladin Press, the only publisher interested in the manuscript. In exchange for a modest book advance of a few $1,000s, the author agreed to rewrite the fictional story into a step-by-step manual narrated by a fictional hitman. The author later admitted to drawing inspiration from a variety of sources, including books, movies, television, newspapers, police officers, karate instructors, and even a friend who was an attorney. She confessed, "No, I am not a hitman. I don't even own a gun, but don't tell anybody." Despite being officially pulled from publication, Hitman continues to circulate online. An edited version is even available for purchase on Amazon. One chilling excerpt from the book reads, "The kill is the easiest part of the job. People kill one another every day. It takes no great effort to pull a trigger or plunge a knife. What makes you a professional is being able to do it in a way that leaves no trace linking you to the crime." So lurkers, what do you think? Are you familiar with this disturbing case of Lawrence Horn and the heinous things he did to his family? Let me know what you think of this story down below.